Speaker. Hansard in the journals will record this debate as having been on alleged political interference regarding remediation agreement. Now, I'm not sure who decides the titles of these debates, but this is inaccurate. This is not about a remediation agreement. This is about the Prime Minister and his staff politically interfering in a criminal proceeding.
That's right.
Yep. The Prime Minister and his staff, over a period of a number of months, pressured on multiple occasions the Attorney General of Canada to change her mind. To change her mind and then to direct the Director of Public Prosecutions to enter into a remediation agreement, to halt criminal proceedings. The Director of Public Prosecutions is independent for a reason. The Attorney General of Canada acts independently for a reason. Because of the rule of law. Because we as Canadians live in a country that is governed on the rule of law. But yesterday, that belief was shaken. In her testimony, the former Attorney General said this: "I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC Lavalin." Now, last night, the Prime Minister in his press conference in Montreal said he completely disagrees with the Attorney General's comments. He completely disagreed with what she had to say. Only to say, in almost the same breath, he had to say, well, he hadn't actually seen the entire testimony yet. But yet he disagreed with what she said. But of course, how could he have stated that, having not even seen the testimony? Is it perhaps that he had landed on his most recent narrative, and he wasn't prepared to let the facts and the truth get in the way of this current narrative?
That's right.
A narrative that we all know keeps changing, but whose fault it really is. Well, at one point it was the fault of the former Attorney General. It was the fault of the Director of Public Prosecutions. It was the fault of the Conservative Party at one point. It was full of Stephen Harper in some way. And of course it was the fault of Scott Bryson. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Prime Minister will be once again shuffling his cabinet tomorrow morning because he seems to be so good at it. I have to wonder if they're not begging and pleading with Scott Bryson to unresign to try to fix all this, but I simply don't see that happening. Because the fact of the matter is the fault rests with one person. The fault rests with the Prime Minister of Canada.
That's right.
Because the Prime Minister allowed a culture to develop that allowed this feeling of appropriateness. He allowed a culture to develop where it was okay to interfere with the course of justice. And what's even more troubling, Mr. Speaker, is that he allowed this culture where it felt that it was appropriate to interfere with the course of justice, to permeate the public service of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but from day one, this Liberal government has worked to undermine the neutrality of the public service.
So true.
From day one, they booted the Clerk of the Privy Council, Janice Charette. They kicked her out.
Shameful.
And then, just before Christmas, right after they were elected, just before Christmas, hoping that no one would notice, they appointed Matthew Mendelson to a high-ranking position within the Privy Council office. Matthew Mendelson of Dalton McGuinty fame. And then, of course, we see the actions of the Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick. Public servants are guided by the Values and Ethics Code for the public service, in which it states, "Public servants shall serve the public interest by acting at all times with integrity and in a manner that will bear the closest public scrutiny, an obligation that may not be fully satisfied by simply acting within the law." Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister allowed the Clerk of the Privy Council to fail in this duty. In fact, in her testimony yesterday, the former Attorney General said this of her meeting on September 17th, quote, "Then to my surprise, the clerk started to make the case for the DPA. he said, there is a board meeting on Thursday, September 20th with stockholders. Mr. Speaker, why is the clerk of the Privy Council concerned about the shareholders of a private corporation?
Exactly.
This, Mr. Speaker, is beyond the pale. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't simply a slip of the tongue. Again, in the December 29th meeting, he once again stated he spoke about the company's board and the possibility of them selling out to someone else. Again, Mr. Speaker, why is the clerk of the Privy Council talking about shareholders of a private corporation? Now, Mr. Speaker, I, like many Canadians or many politicians, receive emails from Canadians across the country. And just earlier this morning, I received one from an expert on parliamentary governments, a man whose name is associated with many texts and who in this very House is recognized as an authority in this place. And he wrote to me via email and expressed the concern about how the clerk at the Privy Council deals with current deputy ministers. And the question remains, has the clerk recused himself on this matter, or is he still involved in overseeing the public service and deputy ministers on this very matter? What actions is the clerk taking today in relation to the Deputy Minister of Justice and the Deputy Attorney General of Canada? This must be answered. Now, the clerk also informed the former Attorney General that, quote, I think he is going to find a way, he, the Prime Minister, to get it done. One way or another, he is in that kind of a mood, and I wanted you to be aware of it. Well, the Prime Minister thought he did find a way. He dropped her as Attorney General. He dropped her. But not before the deputy was informed by the clerk of this. Quote, on Friday, January 11th, 2019, the Friday before the shuffle, my former deputy minister was called by the clerk and told that the shuffle was happening and that she would be getting a new minister. As part of this conversation, the clerk told the deputy that one of the first conversations the new minister will be expected to have with the Prime Minister would be on SNC Lavalin. Wow. In other words, that the new minister would be prepared to speak to the Prime Minister on this file.
Wow.
And Mr. Speaker, just moments ago, iPolitics reported that in fact, shortly after the current Attorney General was appointed, he was in fact briefed on the SNC Lavalin case.
Wow.
This in spite of the fact that the Public Prosecution Service had already made up its mind. This after the fact that the former Attorney General made up her mind. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, iPolitics is also reporting that the Attorney General met with unnamed members of the Prime Minister's office on this issue.
Wow. Wow.
Mr. Speaker, these Liberals just don't learn. Interfering with the independence of the Attorney General, attempting to get her to interfere with the independent Director of Public Prosecutions is wrong. And yet, these Liberals are still trying to cover up. The Prime Minister is still holding cabinet confidence over the time that the former Attorney General continued to serve in cabinet, which begs the question, what more are these Liberals trying to hide? Mr. Speaker, these Liberals have shaken the belief of Canadians in the independence of our judiciary and on the rule of law. I want to conclude very briefly by citing what was reported yesterday as having been said by Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. She is reported as having said, "We don't want to debate legalities anymore," end quote. Mr. Speaker, we on this side will debate legalities. We on this side will stand up for the independence of the judiciary. And we on this side, in the Conservative Party of Canada, will stand on the side of the rule of law, and we will ensure that we get answers from these Liberals on this unacceptable practice when it came to the interference in the course of justice.
Here, here. Thank you. Here, here.